This is a BBC podcast. You can get all our podcasts and our terms of use at bbcworldservice.com/podcast.
Hello and welcome to Outlook from the BBC World Service. This is Matthew Bannister with more extraordinary personal stories from around the world. Today, a man who lost 3 members of his family in the Srebrenica massacre says there are still thousands of war criminals walking around free in Bosnia. And 50 years on, one of the freedom writers who fought against racial segregation in the American South tells how he nearly lost his life. First, the arrest of the former Bosnian Serb military commander Ratko Mladic is a significant moment for the families of those who died in the massacre at Srebrenica in 1995. At least 7,500 people, mostly men and boys, were killed. Mr. Mladic is wanted in The Hague on charges of genocide, which include responsibility for those killings. He denies giving that order. At the time of the massacre, Hasan Nuhanovic was working as a translator for Dutch soldiers serving with the UN peacekeeping force in Srebrenica. Believing that his family would be safe if they moved into the UN compound, he brought his father, mother and brother to stay there. When I first spoke to Hasan in October 2009, he told me what happened next.
We spent 2 days on the compound, and on the 3rd day, the Dutch battalion UN Blue Helmets ordered these people to walk out of the compound. The Serb soldiers and the police waited outside at the main gate. So people walked out and they went straight to the hands of the Serbs. And that's the last time I saw my family alive.
It must have been absolutely agonizing, that moment of separation.
Yes, it was. It was the most difficult moment in my life. You know, I live with that every single day.
And since then, you've worked tirelessly to try to find out more about what happened. Has that been a really difficult and tortuous process?
It actually was very, very difficult process, especially during the first couple of years after 95. I had a very difficult time dealing with all that happened, you know, to me and to the other people around me, my relatives, my friends. I mean, I lost friends, relatives, my parents, my brother, just within very, very short period of time. And I had to tell myself that they were dead. I had to convince myself that hope was dead. I thought I was going to lose my mind. So I told myself, I think it was maybe something like 98. That was actually when my daughter was born. I told myself, you know, you can't go on like this. Okay, I continued searching for information, but I told myself they're dead. The only thing you can find is maybe their bodies.
Hasan Nuhanovic speaking to me on Outlook in October 2009. Well, Hasan continues to campaign for justice for the victims of Srebrenica. He also spent years trying to track down the remains of his father, mother and brother. When I spoke to him again on Tuesday morning, I asked him how he felt when he heard that Ratko Mladic had been arrested.
What crossed my mind was that, okay, this man is now going to be put behind the bars or put on trial. And, you know, what's left behind him are, for example, 3 graves of my parents and my brother that I visit sometimes when I go back to Srebrenica.
Last time we spoke, you had just found the remains of your mother, and now you've obviously found the remains of your father and brother too. That was a terribly difficult process, wasn't it?
It was a very difficult process. I mean, you know, they're dead. They're missing. Their skeletal remains are scattered somewhere in the hills and valleys of Bosnia and who knows where. But when they call you and they say they are calling from the International Commission on Missing Persons, you know what it's about. And then they start telling you some details. And then you go to their office and they show you a sketch of human skeleton, telling you which parts of the skeleton have been exhumed and identified and which parts are still missing. It's really a very difficult process to go through.
And are those remains now buried in the cemetery for the victims of Srebrenica?
Yes, they are. You go there now and you have more than 4,000 graves, and among those graves are the graves of my parents, my brother and my uncle now, and all of the victims are now together at one place, and that's something special.
Were you surprised that it took so long for Mladic to be arrested?
Yeah, when we realized that after several years passed by without any serious attempts to arrest Mladic, we simply gave up. We did not expect that he was ever going to be arrested. So this came 16 years late, and he's a completely different person physically, compared to what he was 16 years ago when he said to these people, God cannot help you, but I can. That's what he said, when he met my father at the meeting. And now you have the media in Republika Srpska in Serbia, where ordinary Serb people say they feel sorry for his physical condition.
Did you meet him yourself?
I never met him, but my father, before he was killed, he attended a meeting with Mladic where he spoke on behalf of 25,000 refugees who were in and around UN compound. He seemed somewhat more optimistic after he returned from the meeting. Maybe because Mladic told him something that gave him hope, or my father just pretended because he did not want me to panic, or my mother or my brother, and that's what he tried to be until the very last moment when he and my mother and brother were ordered to leave the UN compound by the Dutch soldiers. Even at that moment, he was trying to calm me down because he knew that I, as a UN employee, was allowed to remain on the compound.
Last time I spoke to you, which was 2 years ago, you said that there were hundreds or possibly thousands of war crime suspects walking about with impunity, some of them in Sarajevo where you were living. And that's still presumably, according to you, the case.
Really, this is unfortunately not the end of the story. He is the main war crime suspect, but he is not the only one. And I'm sitting now in a building in Sarajevo where there is a person who actually was most probably involved in the killing of my mother. There is really nothing I can do about it. I went to the prosecutor's office, reported it many times, even provided some evidence, but he hasn't been indicted yet. This is just one example.
People talk about getting closure after a traumatic event like this. Do you think about getting closure, or do you think that for the rest of your life you will have to be a campaigner on this subject?
I'm afraid that I will have to continue to campaign for many years to come. And one of the reasons, for example, is the comments on a blog. There's an internet blog on a website of one of these Serbian newspapers, and there was an article with my statement there, and I read like 350 comments made by presumably Serbs from Belgrade or somewhere, who just write that they don't believe that this ever happened. Some even claim I'm a liar. Most of them write that, okay, maybe this really happened, but what about the Serbs who were killed and so on? So it's very frustrating to see that 16 years after the war, there are so many people who still think the same way like 16 years ago.
Hasan Ivanovic speaking to me from Sarajevo. This is Outlook from the BBC World Service. I'm Matthew Bannister. And there's been quite a bit of